The morning sunlight poured through the small window of Sophia Gardner's bedroom like liquid gold, casting long shadows across the worn floorboards as she sat before her mirror, methodically brushing her chestnut hair. Her reflection stared back, hollow-eyed and resigned, a stark contrast to the excited bride she should have been on the eve of her wedding day. Sophia was 21 years old, and tomorrow she would marry Harold Blackburn, a man 30 years her senior, a man she did not love, a man whose touch made her skin crawl, but a man who could save her family from financial ruin. Abiquiu, New Mexico Territory, 1877. The small settlement nestled in the Rio Arriba County had been Sophia's home her entire life. The Gardner family ranch had once been prosperous, but 3 years of drought followed by her father's untimely death had left them teetering on the edge of destitution. Her mother, Margaret, bedridden with consumption, could no longer work, and Sophia's younger brothers, Thomas and William, aged 16 and 14, were too young to manage the failing ranch alone. When Harold Blackburn, the wealthiest man in the county and owner of the mercantile, had proposed a business arrangement disguised as a marriage proposal, Sophia knew she had no choice. She would marry him, he would assume their debts, and her family would not starve or lose their home. A simple transaction, devoid of love but full of practical salvation. "Sophia," her mother's weak voice called from the adjacent bedroom. "Are you awake, dear?" Sophia set down her brush and rose, smoothing her simple cotton dress. "Yes, mother, I'll bring your tea now." She made her way to the kitchen, where the kettle already simmered on the stove. Thomas sat at the table, his lanky frame hunched over a plate of eggs. "Morning, Soph," he mumbled, not meeting her eyes. None of them could bear to look at her lately, knowing the sacrifice she was making. "Good morning," she replied, preparing her mother's tea with methodical care. "Where's Will?" Checking the fence line in the north pasture. "He said he'd be back before noon." Sophia nodded, adding a spoonful of honey to the tea, a luxury they could still ill afford, but one of the few comforts her mother had left. As she carried the steaming cup to her mother's room, she caught sight of herself in the hallway mirror. She paused, studying the face of a young woman whose dreams were being set aside for duty. She straightened her shoulders and continued walking. This was her choice, she reminded herself. The only choice. Margaret Gardner lay propped against pillows, her once robust frame now thin and frail, her skin papery and pale. Yet her eyes, so like Sophia's own amber ones, remained sharp and observant. "You haven't slept," her mother stated, accepting the tea with trembling hands. "I had much to think about," Sophia replied, sitting on the edge of the bed. "You don't have to do this," Margaret said for perhaps the 100th time. "We could sell the ranch, move to Santa Fe. I have a cousin there who— And what would we live on, mother?" "Your cousin has 5 children of her own. The ranch is mortgaged to the hilt. Mr. Blackburn's offer is generous." "It is not generosity that motivates that man, Sophia. It is possession. He wants to own you like he owns half the businesses in the county." Sophia couldn't argue with this truth. Harold Blackburn had built his empire through shrewd and often ruthless business dealings. At 51, he had buried 2 wives already, and had made no secret of his desire for a young wife to give him the heir his previous marriages had not. "It doesn't matter," Sophia said softly. "The arrangements are made. The wedding is tomorrow. Mr. Blackburn has already paid off our most pressing debts." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Your father would never have wanted this for you." "Father isn't here," Sophia replied more sharply than she intended. She softened her tone. "I'm sorry, but he isn't, and we must do what we can to survive." A commotion outside drew their attention. Through the window, Sophia could see a cloud of dust approaching the house riders, at least 3 of them. Visitors were rare this far from town. "Are we expecting anyone?" Margaret asked, struggling to sit up straighter. "No." Sophia stood, smoothing her skirts. "Rest, Mother, I'll see who it is." She stepped onto the front porch just as the riders reached the house. 3 men on horseback, trail-worn and dusty. 2 she didn't recognize, but the third, who rode slightly ahead of the others, was familiar Victor Hayes, the foreman from the Big Sky ranch that bordered their property to the west. She had seen him occasionally in town, but had never spoken more than a few words to him. He was perhaps 5 or 6 years older than her, tall and broad-shouldered with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer sky. Unlike many cowboys, he carried himself with a quiet confidence that commanded respect without demanding it. "Miss Gardner," he called, tipping his hat as he dismounted. "Forgive the intrusion. We're tracking a small herd of cattle that broke through the fence line last night, about 20 head. Don't suppose you've seen them." "I haven't, Mr. Hayes," Sophia replied, suddenly conscious of her simple dress and loose hair. "But my brother William is checking the north fence line. He might have spotted them." Victor nodded, his gaze lingering on her face a moment longer than necessary. "Much obliged." "These are my new hands, Jake Collins and Freddie Martinez." The 2 men tipped their hats in greeting. "We'll just wait here for your brother if that's all right. Don't want to trespass on your land without permission." "Of course," Sophia said. "Would you like some coffee while you wait?" "It's already brewing." A smile touched Victor's lips, transforming his weathered face. "That would be mighty kind, Miss Gardner." She led them to the porch, where a bench and 2 chairs offered seating. Thomas emerged from the house, eyeing the visitors warily. At 16, he tried hard to fill the role of man of the house, despite his youth. "Thomas, this is Mr. Hayes and his men from Big Sky. They're looking for some stray cattle." Sophia turned to Victor. "My brother Thomas." The men shook hands, Thomas gripping perhaps a bit too firmly in an attempt to assert himself. Victor didn't seem to mind, treating the boy with the same respect he might show a grown man. "I'll get that coffee," Sophia said, disappearing inside. In the kitchen, she took a moment to compose herself, surprised by her reaction to Victor Hayes's presence. For months, she had been numb, going through the motions of life with detached resignation. Yet something about the cowboy's direct gaze had momentarily pierced that protective shell, reminding her of feelings she had determinedly suppressed. She returned with a tray of coffee cups and found the men discussing cattle prices and grazing conditions, the universal language of ranchers everywhere. Victor rose when she appeared, a gesture of respect that Harold Blackburn, for all his wealth, had never shown her. "You've been managing the ranch since your father passed?" Victor asked as she handed him a steaming cup. "Yes, with my brother's help," Sophia replied. "Though I'm afraid we haven't been very successful." "Times are hard all over," Victor said, his tone sympathetic but not pitying. "Big Sky's feeling the pinch too, but we're making do. Your father was a good man, taught me a few things about ranching when I first came to these parts." "You knew my father?" Sophia hadn't realized there was any connection. Victor nodded, sipping his coffee. "Worked for him briefly about 7 years back before I signed on at Big Sky. He was fair-minded, respected by everyone." The conversation was interrupted by William's arrival, riding hard up to the house. He reined in his horse, eyes widening at the sight of visitors. "Will," Thomas called. "These men are looking for stray cattle. Did you see any up north?" William dismounted, a gangly boy on the cusp of manhood. "Yes, about 15 head near Crooked Creek. They've got the Big Sky brand." "That's them," Victor said, setting down his cup and standing. "Much obliged for the information and the coffee, Miss Gardner." "You're welcome, Mr. Hayes," Sophia replied, feeling an inexplicable reluctance to see him leave. "Good luck with your cattle." As the men prepared to ride out, Victor paused, turning back to Sophia. "I heard in town that you're to be married tomorrow, to Harold Blackburn." His tone was carefully neutral. Sophia felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Yes, that's right." Something flickered in Victor's eyes, concern, perhaps, or something else she couldn't identify. "Congratulations," he said finally, though the words seemed to cost him effort. "Mr. Blackburn is a fortunate man." Before she could respond, he mounted his horse and led his men away, leaving a cloud of dust and a strange sense of disquiet in his wake. Thomas watched them go, then turned to Sophia with an unusually perceptive expression for a 16-year-old. "He doesn't think much of your match with Blackburn." "It doesn't matter what Mr. Hayes or anyone else thinks," Sophia replied, gathering the empty cups. "The decision is made." But as she went about her chores that day, Victor Hayes's face kept appearing in her mind, the quiet strength in his bearing, the momentary softness in his eyes when he smiled, the unspoken concern when he mentioned her impending marriage. It was foolish to dwell on such things, she told herself firmly. Tomorrow she would be Mrs. Harold Blackburn, and whatever might have been was irrelevant. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, as if nature itself was mocking Sophia's inner turmoil. She stood in her bedroom, wearing the cream-colored dress that had been her mother's, altered to fit her smaller frame. Margaret sat nearby, too weak to stand for long but determined to help her daughter prepare. "You look beautiful," Margaret said softly, tears glistening in her eyes. Sophia gazed at her reflection, barely recognizing herself. The dress was lovely, but she felt like a stranger in her own skin. "Thank you, Mother." A knock at the door heralded Thomas, dressed in his Sunday best, his hair slicked down with water. "The wagon's ready." "Reverend Palmer is waiting at the church." Sophia nodded, helping her mother to her feet. This small wedding was a far cry from the celebration she had once imagined for herself, but elaborate festivities would have been pointless given the circumstances. Harold had wanted to be married at his house, with just the Reverend present, but Sophia had insisted on the church. If she was to sell herself into a loveless marriage, she would at least do it properly, before God and the community. The small church in Abiquiu was filled with curious onlookers, neighbors, and townspeople drawn by the unusual match. Harold Blackburn stood at the altar, his portly frame encased in an expensive suit, his gray hair and beard neatly trimmed. He was not an unattractive man for his age, but his small, calculating eyes betrayed a coldness that no amount of wealth could disguise. As Sophia walked down the aisle on Thomas's arm, she scanned the church, an automatic gesture she didn't fully understand until her gaze found what it was seeking: Victor Hayes, standing at the back, his tall frame seeming out of place among the other attendees. Their eyes met briefly before she forced herself to look away, focusing instead on her soon-to-be husband. The ceremony was brief and solemn. Sophia spoke her vows in a clear voice that betrayed none of her inner despair. Harold's hands were dry and cool as they exchanged rings, and when Reverend Palmer pronounced them man and wife, his kiss on her lips was perfunctory, a seal on a business transaction rather than a gesture of love. There was a small reception at the Mercantile, which Harold had closed for the occasion. As the new Mrs. Blackburn accepted congratulations from well-wishers, she was acutely aware of her husband's proprietary hand at the small of her back, guiding her, positioning her, displaying his new acquisition to the town. "Mrs. Blackburn," a familiar voice said, and she turned to find Victor Hayes standing before her, hat in hand. Up close, she could see the tension in his jaw, the carefully controlled expression. "Mr. Hayes," she replied, conscious of Harold's grip tightening slightly. "Thank you for coming." "Wouldn't have missed it," Victor said, his eyes holding hers for a moment before shifting to Harold. "Congratulations, Mr. Blackburn. You're a lucky man." Harold's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Indeed I am, Hayes. Indeed I am." He pulled Sophia closer, a gesture of possession that wasn't lost on either of them. Victor nodded once, then moved on, disappearing into the crowd. Sophia watched him go, feeling as if something precious and undefined had slipped away forever. Later that night, in the master bedroom of Harold Blackburn's large house on the hill overlooking Abiquiu, Sophia endured her husband's attentions with detached resignation. She had known what to expect. Her mother had prepared her as gently as possible, but the reality was still a shock. Harold was not cruel, but neither was he considerate, taking his pleasure efficiently and falling asleep almost immediately afterward, leaving Sophia to stare at the unfamiliar ceiling, tears silently tracking down her temples into her hair. This was her life now. She had made her choice for her family's sake, and she would honor it. But as she finally drifted into uneasy sleep, it was not her husband's face she saw, but the troubled blue eyes of a cowboy who had looked at her with something she hadn't recognized, until it was too late understanding, and perhaps something more. The weeks that followed settled into a routine that, if not happy, was at least predictable. Harold expected Sophia to run his household efficiently, to be presentable when he entertained business associates, and to be available to him at night. In return, he provided well for her family. Margaret was seen by the best doctor in Santa Fe, who prescribed new treatments that seemed to ease her symptoms, and the boys were given positions in the mercantile, learning the business under Harold's strict but fair guidance. Sophia herself wanted for nothing material. Harold was generous with household funds and occasionally brought her gifts: a new dress, a bottle of French perfume, a silver hairbrush. But these tokens couldn't fill the emptiness that grew within her each day, the sense of living someone else's life while her true self withered away. Her only true joy came from her daily visits to her family at the ranch, which Harold permitted as long as her household duties were completed first. One afternoon in late June, about 2 months after her wedding, Sophia was returning from such a visit when a summer thunderstorm broke suddenly, drenching her before she could reach town. She urged her horse to a gallop, but the rain was blinding, and suddenly the animal stumbled, throwing Sophia from the saddle. She landed hard, pain shooting through her ankle as she rolled to a stop in the mud. Her horse, thankfully uninjured, trotted a few paces away, then stopped, ears flicking nervously as thunder crashed overhead. Sophia tried to stand but collapsed with a cry of pain. Her ankle, already swelling, couldn't bear her weight. She was still 3 miles from town, on a rarely traveled road, with night approaching and the storm intensifying. Fear gripped her as she realized the seriousness of her situation. "Come on," she called to her horse, trying to keep her voice calm despite her panic. "Come here, girl." The horse took a tentative step toward her, then spooked as another thunderclap boomed, trotting further away. Sophia bit back tears of frustration and pain. She would have to crawl to somewhere more sheltered and hope someone came looking for her when she didn't return home. She had barely moved a few feet when hoofbeats approached, barely audible over the rain. Looking up, she saw a rider emerging from the gloom, leading a second horse, her own. Relief washed over her, quickly replaced by a different kind of tension when she recognized Victor Hayes. He dismounted in one fluid motion, crossing to her with long strides. "Mrs. Blackburn," he said, crouching beside her, his face etched with concern. "Are you hurt?" "My ankle," Sophia replied, suddenly conscious of her bedraggled appearance. I think it might be broken. My horse threw me when the storm hit. Victor nodded, his eyes assessing her professionally. May I? He asked, gesturing toward her injured ankle. At her nod, he gently examined the swollen joint through her sodden boot and skirts. I don't think it's broken, but it's a bad sprain. You can't ride like this. He glanced up at the darkening sky. And this storm isn't letting up. My line shack is about a half-mile from here. We can shelter there until it passes. Sophia hesitated, keenly aware of how improper it would be to accompany him alone to a remote cabin. Perhaps you could go for help instead. It would take too long, Victor said, rain streaming down his face. You're already soaked through and the temperature's dropping. I don't like to think what your husband would do to me if I left you out here to catch your death. There was something in his tone when he mentioned Harold that Sophia couldn't quite identify, but the logic of his argument was undeniable. She nodded her agreement. Without further discussion, Victor scooped her up in his arms as if she weighed nothing, carrying her to his horse. He settled her in the saddle, then mounted behind her, one arm securely around her waist as he took the reins with the other hand. Her horse followed on a lead rope as they set off through the storm. The line shack was small but solidly built, a single room with a cast iron stove, a narrow cot, a table, and 2 chairs. Victor carried Sophia inside and set her gently on the cot before moving efficiently around the small space, lighting a lantern, building a fire in the stove, and retrieving a medical kit from a shelf. We need to get you out of those wet clothes, he said matter-of-factly, though a slight flush colored his cheekbones. I have a spare shirt and trousers that might do. They'll be too big, but they're dry. Sophia clutched her soaked dress closer, mortified at the suggestion. Mr. Hayes, I couldn't possibly. You'll catch pneumonia, Victor interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. I'll step outside while you change. The clothes are here. He placed a folded shirt and pair of trousers beside her. There's a blanket, too. Wrap your ankle after you're changed, and I'll have a proper look at it. Before she could protest further, he was gone, closing the door firmly behind him. Sophia sat for a moment, torn between propriety and practicality. The chills seeping into her bones decided the matter. As quickly as her injured ankle allowed, she stripped off her sodden garments and pulled on Victor's clothes. The cotton shirt smelled faintly of soap and sunshine, and despite its size, felt comforting against her skin. I'm decent, she called when she had finished, wrapping the blanket around herself for additional modesty. Victor entered, deliberately averting his eyes until he was certain of her state of dress. Let's have a look at that ankle now, he said, kneeling before her. His hands were gentle as he examined the injury, applying a salve from his kit before wrapping it expertly in a bandage. Where did you learn to do that? Sophia asked, curious despite her discomfort at the situation. Army, Victor replied. Served as a cavalry scout after the war. Picked up a few medical skills along the way. He finished with the bandage and stood, moving to hang her wet clothing near the stove to dry. You should try to rest. I'll make some coffee. As he busied himself with the coffee pot, Sophia studied him surreptitiously. In the lantern light, she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the small scar on his jaw, the strength in his hands as he worked. There was something profoundly reassuring about his presence, a steadiness that made her feel safe despite the impropriety of their situation. Your husband will be worried, Victor said after a while, handing her a tin cup of strong black coffee. Sophia accepted the cup, grateful for its warmth. Perhaps, though he often works late at the mercantile, he might not notice my absence until supper time. Something flickered in Victor's eyes, disapproval. Anger. It was gone too quickly for her to be sure. The storm should pass by then. I'll get you home as soon as it's safe. They sat in silence for a time, listening to the rain drumming on the roof and the occasional rumble of thunder, now moving away. The awkwardness Sophia had expected didn't materialize. Instead, there was a strange comfort in the quiet companionship. "May I ask you something, Mrs. Blackburn?" Victor said finally, his voice careful. "Sophia, please," she replied. "After all this, formality seems a bit absurd." A small smile touched his lips. "Sophia, then, are you happy?" The directness of the question startled her. In the 2 months of her marriage, no one had asked her that, not her mother, not her brothers, certainly not her husband. Everyone had accepted the arrangement at face value, a necessary sacrifice for the greater good. She began, then faltered, suddenly unable to maintain the pretense she had upheld for so long. "No," she admitted quietly, "I'm not. But happiness wasn't part of the bargain." Victor's gaze was steady, undemanding. "What was the bargain, if you don't mind my asking?" And somehow, in that small shack with the rain falling outside, Sophia found herself telling him everything: her father's death, the failing ranch, her mother's illness, Harold's proposal, and the financial security it offered. Victor listened without interruption, his eyes never leaving her face. "You sacrificed your own happiness for your family's well-being," he said when she had finished. "That takes courage." "Or cowardice," Sophia replied, looking down at her hands. "Sometimes I think a braver person would have found another way." "There isn't always another way," Victor said softly. "Sometimes life only gives us impossible choices." Something in his tone made her look up. "You sound like you speak from experience." A shadow crossed his face. "I've made my share of hard choices, lived with the consequences." Sophia waited, sensing there was more he wanted to say. After a moment, Victor continued, his voice low. "I was married once. Her name was Emily. We were young, barely more than children ourselves. She died in childbirth, along with our son." The pain in his voice was old but still raw. "I was away when it happened, working a cattle drive to earn enough money for a place of our own. By the time I got back, they were both gone." "I'm so sorry," Sophia whispered, her own troubles momentarily forgotten in the face of his grief. Victor nodded once, acknowledging her sympathy. "For a long time, I blamed myself. If I'd been there, if I'd made different choices. But eventually I realized that some things are beyond our control. All we can do is make the best decisions we can with what we know at the time." His words resonated deeply with Sophia, offering a perspective on her own situation she hadn't considered. Had she really made the best decision she could? Or had fear driven her to accept Harold's proposal without exploring other possibilities? "The rain's stopping," Victor noted, breaking into her thoughts. He moved to the window, pushing aside the crude burlap curtain. "We should get you home before your absence causes talk." Reality crashed back, reminding Sophia of her position and responsibilities. "Yes, of course." Victor helped her dress in her now dry clothing, his touch impersonal and respectful despite the intimacy of the situation. When she was ready, he carried her to his horse and settled her in the saddle, then mounted behind her as before. This time, however, Sophia was acutely aware of his body against hers, the strength in the arm that circled her waist, the warmth of his breath occasionally brushing her neck. It was a closeness she had never felt with Harold, despite the physical intimacy of their marriage. They rode in silence through the freshly washed landscape, the setting sun breaking through the departing clouds to cast everything in golden light. As they approached the outskirts of Abiquiu, Victor spoke, his voice low near her ear. "I'm leaving at the end of the week. Taking a herd north to Colorado for the boss." Sophia felt an unexpected pang at his words. "How long will you be gone?" "A month, maybe 2. He paused, then added, "I wanted you to know, in case you needed anything while I was away." The implication was clear. He was concerned for her welfare. "I'll be fine, Mr. Hayes." "Victor," he corrected gently. "After all, this formality seems a bit absurd." She smiled despite herself, hearing her own words echoed back to her. "Victor, then. Thank you for your concern, but I'll be fine. Harold is. He provides well for me." "Providing isn't the same as caring," Victor said, then immediately seemed to regret his forthrightness. "Forgive me. It's not my place." Before Sophia could respond, they had reached the edge of town. Victor halted the horse. "I should let you ride in alone from here. People talk." He was right, of course. Arriving in town on the same horse as Victor Hayes, her clothing rumpled and her hair disheveled, would set tongues wagging immediately. "Of course," Sophia agreed, allowing him to help her down and mount her own horse. Her ankle throbbed, but she could manage the short distance to Harold's house. "Take care of yourself, Sophia," Victor said, holding her gaze for a moment longer than necessary. "I mean that. And you as well," she replied. "Safe travels." As she rode away, she resisted the urge to look back, knowing that whatever had happened between them in that line shacked the unexpected connection. The mutual understanding had to remain there, a brief interlude outside the boundaries of her real life. Harold was indeed working late at the mercantile when Sophia arrived home. She had time to bathe, change into fresh clothing, and prepare a simple supper before he returned. If he noticed her slight limp or subdued manner, he made no comment, speaking instead of business matters and town gossip as they ate. That night, when he reached for her in bed, Sophia closed her eyes and endured his attentions as always. But for the first time, her mind wandered, imagining different hands touching her, a different voice murmuring in her ear. The guilt that followed was almost as overwhelming as the realization that prompted it somewhere during that stormy afternoon. Victor Hayes had awakened feelings in her that she had thought safely buried. The weeks that followed were a study in carefully maintained appearances. Outwardly, Sophia was the perfect wife, managing Harold's household, accompanying him to social events, fulfilling her duties without complaint. Inwardly, she found herself counting the days until Victor's expected return, even as she chastised herself for such foolishness. In early August, nearly 6 weeks after the incident in the line shack, Sophia was shopping in the mercantile when she overheard 2 women discussing the Big Sky cattle drive. "Heard they ran into trouble up near Durango," one woman said. "Rustlers hit them hard." "Anyone hurt?" asked the other. "Word is the foreman took a bullet. Hayes, I think his name is." The tin of coffee Sophia was holding slipped from her suddenly numb fingers, clattering loudly on the floor. Both women turned to look at her, curiosity in their eyes. "Mrs. Blackburn, are you all right?" one asked. "Yes, I'm sorry," Sophia replied, forcing her voice to remain steady as she bent to retrieve the tin. "Clumsy of me." She completed her shopping in a fog of anxiety, her mind racing with worst-case scenarios. Victor wounded, perhaps dying, far from home with no one to care for him. The thought was intolerable, yet there was nothing she could do, no way to seek information without revealing an interest that would raise eyebrows. No justification for concern beyond that of a casual acquaintance. That evening, Harold announced that he would be traveling to Santa Fe for business, leaving the following morning and returning in 3 days. Normally, Sophia would have welcomed the brief respite from his presence, but now she saw it as an opportunity. With Harold away, she could make discreet inquiries about Victor without arousing suspicion. As soon as Harold departed the next day, Sophia rode to the Big Sky Ranch. She had prepared a plausible excuse, inquiring about buying a horse for her brother Thomas's upcoming birthday, but her heart pounded with anxiety as she approached the main house. The ranch owner's wife, Mrs. Alina Davis, greeted her with surprise but genuine warmth. "Mrs. Blackburn, what a pleasant surprise. Please come in." Over tea in the comfortable parlor, Sophia carefully steered the conversation toward the cattle drive and eventually to Victor. "I heard there was some trouble," she said, trying to keep her tone casual. "Rustlers, was it, Mrs.?" Davis nodded, her kind face troubled. "Yes, a nasty business. They lost about 30 head and poor Victor was shot in the shoulder. They brought him back 2 days ago. The doctor says he'll recover, but it will take time." Relief flooded through Sophia, so powerful she had to set down her teacup to hide the trembling of her hands. "That's good to hear. Mr. Hayes helped me once when my horse threw me during a storm. I would have been in serious trouble if he hadn't come along." "That sounds like Victor, Mrs." Davis said with a fond smile. "Always ready to help others, even at cost to himself." She studied Sophia for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "He's staying in the foreman's cabin just behind the main house. I'm sure he'd appreciate a visit from someone other than the doctor or Mr. Davis." The invitation was clear, and though Sophia knew she should decline, she found herself nodding. "I would like to thank him properly." Mrs. Davis led her to a small but well-built cabin set slightly apart from the bunkhouse. "I'll leave you to your visit," she said with a knowing smile that made Sophia wonder just how transparent her feelings were. Victor was sitting in a chair by the window, his left arm in a sling, his face pale but his eyes alert. When Sophia entered, those eyes widened with surprise, then softened with something that made her heart skip. "Sophia," he said, starting to rise. "Don't get up," she said quickly, crossing to him. "I heard about what happened. I wanted to see how you were." Victor settled back in his chair, watching her with an intensity that made her cheeks warm. "I'm mending. Bullet went clean through, missed anything vital. I'll be back to work in a few weeks." Sophia sat in the chair opposite him, suddenly uncertain what to say now that she was actually here. "I was worried," she admitted finally, "when I heard you were hurt. Were you?" There was a cautious hope in his voice that matched the feeling expanding in her own chest. "Yes," she said simply. "Very much so." They sat in silence for a moment, the admission hanging between them, changing everything and nothing at once. "How have you been?" Victor asked, his eyes never leaving her face. "These past weeks?" Sophia considered lying, offering the polite fiction that all was well. But something in his gaze demanded honesty. "Lonely," she said. "Going through the motions, wondering if I made the right choice." Victor nodded, understanding without judgment. "And now I don't know what to think," she confessed. "Or what to do. I made vows, Victor, for better or worse." "Vows made under duress," he said quietly. "To save your family, not from love. Does that make them less binding?" Victor didn't answer immediately, considering her question seriously. "I can't answer that for you, Sophia. All I know is that when I was lying on the ground with a bullet in my shoulder, thinking I might die, it was your face I saw. Your voice I heard. And I knew then that whatever I felt for you wasn't going to go away just because it's inconvenient or impossible." His words struck her like a physical blow, both painful and exhilarating. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I care for you," Victor replied, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "More than I should, more than is right, given your situation. And if there's any chance you might feel the same, I need to know. Not so we can do anything about it right now, but so I know whether to hope or to try to forget." Sophia stood abruptly, moving to the window, needing distance from the intensity of his gaze. Outside, ranch hands went about their duties, a normal day unfolding while her world tilted on its axis. "I do feel the same," she said finally, her back still to him. I've tried not to. I've reminded myself of my obligations, my vows, but when I heard you were hurt, I realized. She turned to face him. I realized that whatever this is between us, it's stronger than my attempts to deny it. Victor's expression was a complex mixture of joy and pain. What do we do with that knowledge? It was the question Sophia had been asking herself since she first admitted her feelings. For now, nothing, she said, the words costing her more than she wanted to admit. You need to heal, I need to think, and we both need to be very careful. Harold is not a forgiving man. Victor nodded, accepting her caution while clearly wishing for more. Will you come back? To visit while I'm recovering? Sophia knew she should refuse, that each meeting only deepened a connection that could lead nowhere good. But the thought of not seeing him again was unbearable. Yes, she promised. When I can. Over the next few weeks, Sophia found reasons to visit the Big Sky Ranch, delivering baked goods from the church ladies' auxiliary, returning a book Mrs. Davis had loaned her, bringing a message from her brother about a horse he was interested in purchasing. Each visit included time with Victor, whose recovery progressed steadily. Their conversations during these visits were careful at first, confined to safe topics, books they had read, places they had seen, childhood memories. But gradually, as trust deepened between them, they began to share more of themselves. Victor told her of his years in the army, of the nightmares that still sometimes woke him, of his dreams of someday owning his own ranch. Sophia spoke of her father, of her love for the land, of the poetry she secretly wrote and never showed anyone. They were scrupulously proper in their physical interactions, never touching beyond the most casual contact, aware that even the appearance of impropriety could be disastrous. But the emotional intimacy that grew between them was more profound than anything Sophia had experienced before, certainly far deeper than the sterile arrangement of her marriage. It was during one of these visits, nearly a month after Victor's injury, that their careful restraint finally cracked. They were walking slowly around the ranch yard, Victor's strength returning enough for short excursions. Sophia was describing a book she had recently read when she stumbled slightly on an uneven patch of ground. Victor's hand shot out to steady her, catching her elbow. The simple contact sent a jolt through them both, and they stopped, frozen in the moment. Sophia, Victor said, his voice rough with suppressed emotion. She looked up at him, unable to disguise what she was feeling, no longer wanting to. Victor. He released her arm immediately, but it was too late. Something had changed. A line had been crossed. They resumed walking, but the tension between them had transformed, charged with awareness and unspoken desire. When they reached the shelter of a large cottonwood tree out of sight of the main house, Victor turned to her. I can't keep pretending, he said, his voice low and urgent. Seeing you like this, being so close but unable to. It's torture, Sophia. I know, she whispered, her resolve weakening. For me too. Victor took a step closer, not touching her but near enough that she could feel the heat of his body. Tell me to go, he said. Tell me to forget you, to leave Abiquiu, and I will. I'd rather be anywhere else than stay here, watching you live a life that makes you unhappy, wanting what I can't have. The thought of Victor leaving, of never seeing him again, was like a knife to Sophia's heart. I can't tell you that, she admitted. I'm not strong enough. For a moment they stood there, balanced on the edge of a precipice, both knowing that whatever happened next would irrevocably change their lives. It was Sophia who moved first, closing the small distance between them and placing her palm against Victor's chest, feeling his heart thundering beneath her hand. I don't know what happens next, she said. I don't know how this ends, but I know I can't walk away from you. Victor's hand came up to cover hers, his touch warm and sure. I don't want to cause you pain, he said. or bring scandal down on you. You've suffered enough. Being apart from you causes me pain, Sophia replied, finding courage in his concern. Everything else is negotiable. A smile touched Victor's lips, the first genuine one she had seen from him in weeks. Negotiable, he repeated. That's a very practical way of looking at it. I'm a practical woman, Sophia said, returning his smile, or I was, until you made me start dreaming again. Victor's free hand came up to cup her cheek, the gesture achingly tender. May I? He asked, his gaze dropping to her lips. Instead of answering, Sophia rose on her tiptoes and pressed her mouth to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but quickly deepened as years of loneliness and months of suppressed longing poured through them both. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily. That was. Sophia began, unable to find words adequate for the experience. A beginning, Victor finished for her, resting his forehead against hers. Whatever happens, whatever obstacles we face, remember this moment. Remember that some things are worth fighting for, worth risking everything for. As Sophia rode home that evening, her lips still tingling from Victor's kiss, her mind raced with equal parts elation and fear. She had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed, made a choice that would have consequences she couldn't yet foresee. But beneath the anxiety was a certainty she had never felt before being with Victor, even for those few stolen moments, had felt more right than anything in her life since her father's death. The next few weeks took on a dreamlike quality for Sophia. Outwardly, her life continued as before, managing Harold's household, attending to her social obligations, visiting her family. But inwardly, she was transformed, living for the moments she could slip away to meet Victor. They were careful, almost painfully so. Their meetings were infrequent and brief, conducted under the guise of legitimate errands or social calls. They met at the Big Sky Ranch when possible, or sometimes by chance that wasn't chance on the road between town and the Gardner family ranch. Once, they encountered each other in the small Abiquiu lending library, exchanging only a few words but communicating volumes with their eyes. As autumn approached, Victor was fully recovered and back to his duties as foreman. He had taken to riding by the Blackburn house during his rounds, timing his passage for when Harold was known to be at the mercantile. Sometimes, Sophia would be in the garden or on the porch, and they could exchange a few words. Other times, just seeing him ride by, tipping his hat to her with that quiet smile that was only for her, was enough to sustain her through another day in her gilded cage. But as their feelings deepened, the constraints of their situation became increasingly difficult to bear. Sophia found herself inventing more excuses to leave the house, taking greater risks for a few precious moments with Victor. And he, for his part, grew more restless with the secrecy and limitations of their relationship. "It can't go on like this," Victor said one afternoon as they sat beneath their cottonwood tree at the edge of Big Sky property, meeting in secret, stealing moments, always looking over our shoulders. "I know," Sophia agreed, her fingers entwined with his. "But what choice do we have?" Victor was silent for a long moment, his thumb tracing patterns on the back of her hand. "We could leave," he said finally. "Start fresh somewhere else, Colorado maybe, or California." The suggestion, though not entirely unexpected, still took Sophia's breath away. "You mean, run away together?" "I mean make a life together," Victor corrected gently. "Openly, honestly. No more hiding, no more pretending." The image was powerfully tempting, a small ranch of their own, waking up beside Victor each morning, building a future based on love rather than obligation. But the reality of what it would mean couldn't be ignored. "I would be breaking my marriage vows," Sophia said, giving voice to her deepest concern. "Abandoning my family, The scandal would follow us wherever we went. Yes, Victor acknowledged, not trying to minimize the gravity of what he was suggesting. I won't pretend it would be easy or that there wouldn't be consequences. But Sophia, the alternative is spending the rest of our lives like this, you trapped in a marriage that drains your spirit a little more each day, me watching from a distance, both of us denying ourselves the chance at real happiness. Sophia looked away, tears blurring her vision. I need time to think, she said. This isn't just about us. My mother, my brothers, they depend on Harold's support. Victor nodded, raising her hand to his lips. Take all the time you need. Just know that whenever you're ready, if you decide this is what you want to, I'll be waiting. The question of leaving with Victor consumed Sophia's thoughts in the days that followed. She found herself studying her mother's face during visits, wondering if Margaret's health had improved enough to withstand another upheaval. She observed her brothers, noting how Thomas, now 17, had matured into a capable young man under Harold's stern but effective tutelage, and how William was thriving in school, his future suddenly full of possibilities that had seemed impossible just months ago. And she watched Harold, trying to see him objectively, to weigh what leaving him would mean. He had kept his part of their bargain, providing generously for her family, treating her with a distant but not unkind courtesy. He was not abusive, not overtly cruel. Yet he had never once asked what she wanted, what she dreamed of, what might make her happy. To him, she was a possession, an ornament, a convenience, never a partner, never truly a wife in anything but name. It was during this period of intense reflection that Sophia began to feel unwell. At first, she attributed her fatigue and occasional nausea to the emotional turmoil of her situation. But as the symptoms persisted, a suspicion formed that she could not ignore. A discreet visit to the doctor in Santa Fe confirmed what she had begun to fear: she was with child. The news hit her like a physical blow. A child changed everything, complicated an already impossible situation beyond measure. The timing left no doubt that the baby was Harold's, conceived during one of their infrequent and mechanical couplings. Yet the thought of bringing a child into her loveless marriage, of raising a son or daughter in the cold atmosphere of the Blackburn household, filled Sophia with a despair she had not felt since the days immediately following her father's death. She told no one of her condition, not even Victor, as she struggled to come to terms with this new reality. Harold, absorbed in his business affairs, noticed nothing amiss in her increased quietness or lack of appetite. But during one of her visits to the ranch, her mother's sharp eyes detected what others had missed. "You're expecting," Margaret said when they were alone, not a question but a statement of fact. Sophia nodded, unable to summon the energy to deny it. "Yes." "About 3 months along, the doctor thinks." Margaret studied her daughter's face. "You don't seem happy about it." "I'm." Sophia hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I'm afraid, Mother, afraid of bringing a child into a home without love." Margaret reached out to take Sophia's hand. "Is it truly so bad with Harold? He provides well and he hasn't mistreated you, has he?" "No, not mistreated," Sophia said carefully. "But there's more to marriage than provision and the absence of cruelty. There's companionship, understanding, joy." She faltered, unwilling to reveal too much. But Margaret, who had known true partnership in her marriage to Sophia's father, understood what remained unspoken. "You found those things elsewhere," she said, her voice quiet but not condemning. "Haven't you?" Sophia looked up sharply, fear coursing through her. "What do you mean?" "I see how you light up when Victor Hayes's name is mentioned," Margaret said gently. "How you find reasons to visit the Big Sky Ranch. How you come back from those visits with color in your cheeks and life in your eyes that's missing at other times." Tears filled Sophia's eyes at her mother's perceptiveness. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she whispered. "I tried so hard to be a good wife, to honor my vows, but Victor, he sees me, Mother, really sees me in a way Harold never has, never will." Margaret squeezed her daughter's hand. "I know, my dear, and I would never judge you for finding comfort where you can, but this child changes things." "I know," Sophia said, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Victor asked me to leave with him to start a new life somewhere else, before I knew about the baby. Now there's an innocent life to consider," Margaret finished for her. She was silent for a moment, then spoke with unexpected firmness. "Sophia, I want you to listen to me very carefully. When I encouraged you to accept Harold's proposal, I thought I was doing what was best for all of us. I was afraid of losing our home, afraid of leaving you and the boys destitute, afraid of dying before I could see you all settled. But watching you these past months, seeing the light in you gradually dimming, I've come to believe I was wrong." Sophia stared at her mother in shock. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that a loveless marriage is too high a price to pay, even for security," Margaret replied. "Your father and I had so little in material terms when we started out, but we had love, and it made everything else bearable. I want that for you, my darling girl. And I want it for my grandchild. But what about you, the boys?" Harold's support, Margaret waved away her concerns. "The boys are nearly grown. Thomas is already talking about apprenticing with the blacksmith, and William has a scholarship offer from the school in Santa Fe. As for me—" She smiled, a hint of her old spirit showing through her frail exterior. "I'm not dead yet, Sophia. My health has improved these past months. I can manage the ranch with the boys' help, at least well enough to sustain us." Sophia couldn't believe what she was hearing. "You're saying I should go with Victor." "I'm saying you should follow your heart," Margaret corrected. "If that leads you to Victor Hayes, then yes, go with him. Build a life based on love, not obligation. That's what your father would have wanted for you." "But the scandal will pass," Margaret said firmly. "People will talk, then find something new to gossip about. What matters is your happiness and the happiness of your child." Sophia sat in stunned silence, her mother's words appending everything she had thought was settled. A way forward suddenly seemed possible, a path out of the trap she had willingly walked into for her family's sake. "I need to tell Victor about the baby," she said finally. "He deserves to know everything before he decides if he still wants, if he still feels the same." Margaret nodded. "Yes, he does. And Sophia, whatever happens, know that you have my blessing and support, always." The opportunity to speak privately with Victor didn't come until several days later, when a church social brought most of Abiquiu's residents together on the grounds behind the small chapel. Harold, never one for social gatherings but conscious of appearances, attended with Sophia but soon became absorbed in a discussion with other businessmen, leaving her free to circulate on her own. She found Victor standing somewhat apart from the crowd, watching the proceedings with the slight detachment that was characteristic of him in large groups. He smiled when he saw her approaching, that special smile that transformed his usually serious face and was reserved only for her. "Mrs. Blackburn," he greeted her formally, mindful of the public setting. "Mr. Hayes," she replied, equally correct. Then, lowering her voice, "Can you meet me behind the church in 10 minutes? There's something important I need to tell you." Concern immediately flickered in his eyes, but he nodded once, understanding the need for discretion. "Of course." Sophia made her way casually through the crowd, stopping to chat with acquaintances, accepting compliments on the apple pie she had contributed to the refreshment table. When she was confident no one was paying particular attention, she slipped around the side of the church to the small cemetery at the back. Victor was already waiting, his tall figure partially concealed by the shadow of a large oak tree. He came to her immediately, taking her hands in his. "What is it? What's wrong?" Sophia took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I'm expecting a child," she said simply. Victor went very still, his eyes searching her face. "Harold's," he said after a moment, again not a question. "Yes," Sophia confirmed. "I'm about 3 months along." Victor released her hands and turned away slightly, absorbing the news. When he faced her again, his expression was carefully controlled. "Does this change your feelings for me?" "No," Sophia said without hesitation. "Not at all, but it does complicate everything." "Yes, it does," Victor agreed, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. "Sophia, I need you to know that this doesn't change how I feel about you. But I would understand if it changes what you're willing to do, what you feel is right." Sophia stepped closer to him, needing him to understand. "I spoke with my mother. She knows about us, she guessed, and she told me to follow my heart, to go with you if that's what I want." Hope flared in Victor's eyes, quickly tempered by caution. "And the child would be raised as ours," Sophia said, the plan forming as she spoke. "We would go far enough away that no one would know or question it. A fresh start, like you said." Victor was quiet for a long moment, considering. "You would be leaving everything behind: your home, your reputation. Your child would be separated from its father." "Harold would be its father in name only," Sophia replied, a new firmness in her voice. "He sees children as heirs, not as people to love and nurture. Our child, my child, deserves better than that, deserves to be raised with love, not duty." Victor studied her face, seeming to search for any sign of doubt or hesitation. Finding none, he pulled her gently into his arms. "Then we'll go," he said, his lips brushing her forehead. "As soon as we can make arrangements. I have some savings, enough to get us to Colorado and set up a small place." "It won't be grand, but I don't need grand," Sophia interrupted, tears of relief and hope filling her eyes. "I just need you, and a chance to live honestly, to love openly." They clung to each other for a precious moment, aware that they might be discovered at any time but unable to separate just yet. "When?" Sophia asked, her face pressed against Victor's shoulder. 2 weeks, he replied. "I need to give notice at Big Sky, collect my wages, buy supplies for the journey. Can you be ready by then?" Sophia nodded, already mentally preparing what she would take, what she would leave behind. "Yes, I'll find a way to get word to you when everything is set on my end." A sound from nearby voices approaching forced them apart. Victor quickly stepped back, his face resuming its usual composed expression, just as 2 elderly women from the church rounded the corner, heading for the cemetery to place flowers on a grave. "Mrs. Blackburn, Mr. Hayes," one greeted them with mild surprise. "Are you looking for someone's grave?" "My father's," Sophia replied smoothly, thankful for the ready excuse. "I was showing Mr. Hayes where he's buried. Papa always spoke highly of his time working with him." The women nodded, accepting the explanation without question, and moved on to their task. Sophia and Victor exchanged one last meaningful look before heading back to the social. Separately, their future now set on a course neither could have imagined just months before. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of secret preparations and growing anxiety for Sophia. She carefully set aside small personal items that wouldn't be missed: her mother's locket, a few cherished books, the journal in which she wrote her poetry. She made arrangements with her mother for a supposed visit to the ranch on the designated day, establishing an alibi that would give her and Victor a head start before her absence was noted. Harold, preoccupied with a large business deal, paid little attention to her comings and goings, which both relieved and saddened Sophia. Even knowing she was carrying his child hadn't increased his interest in her beyond the superficial inquiry about her health when the doctor had confirmed her condition. It reinforced her conviction that leaving was the right choice, not just for her but for her unborn child as well. The day before their planned departure, Sophia visited her mother and brothers at the ranch, her heart heavy with the knowledge that it might be a very long time before she saw them again, if ever. "You're really doing this," Thomas said when Margaret explained the situation to the boys. At 17, he was nearly a man, his face serious as he absorbed the implications of his sister's decision. "I am," Sophia confirmed, watching anxiously for his reaction. Thomas was quiet for a moment, then nodded once, decisive. "Good. You never belonged with Blackburn." Even father would have said so if he'd been here. William, at 15 still more boy than man, was less immediately accepting. "But what about us? What about Mother? We'll manage," Margaret said firmly. "Your sister has sacrificed enough for this family. It's time she had a chance at happiness." By the time Sophia left the ranch that evening, all three had given her their blessing, though with tears and the painful awareness of the separation to come. Thomas had pressed a small carved wooden horse into her hand, his first successful attempt at whittling, a skill their father had taught him. William had given her his prized copy of Treasure Island, dog-eared and well-loved, and Margaret had removed her wedding ring, slipping it onto Sophia's finger beside Harold's larger, more ostentatious band. "For when you can wear it openly," her mother had said. A reminder of a marriage based on love, not convenience. The final night in Harold's house was the most difficult. Sophia moved through her usual evening routine, preparing dinner, listening to Harold's account of his day, retiring to the bedroom they shared with an almost unbearable awareness that each action was for the last time. When Harold reached for her that night, she couldn't suppress her instinctive recoil, her body rebelling at the thought of his touch now that escape was so close. Harold noticed, his eyes narrowing with rare perception. "You're displeased with me for some reason." "No," Sophia lied, forcing herself to relax. "Just tired and concerned about the baby." The mention of the child, his heir, was enough to divert him. Harold nodded, withdrawing his hand. "Of course. You must rest. The doctor said the first months can be difficult for women." Sophia turned away, ostensibly to sleep but actually to hide the tears of relief and guilt that threatened to spill. Despite everything, despite his coldness and his treating her as a possession rather than a partner, Harold had kept his part of their bargain. There was a kind of honor in that, even if it wasn't enough to build a life on. Morning came with a watery sunlight filtering through autumn clouds. Sophia rose early, prepared Harold's breakfast as usual, and saw him off to the mercantile with a practiced smile that revealed nothing of her churning emotions. As soon as he was gone, she moved quickly, changing into her simplest dress, gathering the small bundle of possessions she had prepared, and penning a brief note that explained nothing and everything. "Harold, I cannot continue as we are. You have fulfilled your promises to my family, and for that I will always be grateful. But I must seek my own path now. Please do not look for me. By the time you read this, I will be far away. I release you from any obligation to me or my family. Sophia." She left the note on the dining table, where he would be sure to see it upon his return home that evening. Then, with one last look around the house that had never truly been a home to her, Sophia slipped out the back door and made her way to the agreed-upon meeting place, a small grove of cottonwoods near the river, half a mile outside of town. Victor was waiting, 2 horses saddled and ready, his lean frame tense with anticipation and concern. When he saw her approaching, relief transformed his features. "You came," he said simply, coming to meet her, taking her small bundle from her hands. Did you doubt I would? Sophia asked, studying his face. Not doubted, Victor clarified. Feared that at the last moment duty would outweigh desire. Sophia reached up to touch his cheek, a gesture of reassurance. Not this time. I've done my duty, Victor. Now I choose love. He covered her hand with his own, turning to press a kiss to her palm. Then let's go. We've a long ride ahead of us. They mounted their horses and set off at a steady pace, heading north. Sophia didn't look back at Abiquiu as they rode away, her gaze fixed firmly ahead, toward the future she had chosen. Beside her, Victor rode tall and straight, occasionally glancing at her with a mixture of wonder and determination, as if he still couldn't quite believe their gamble but was committed to seeing it through. They rode through the day, stopping only briefly to rest the horses and eat a simple meal of jerky and biscuits Victor had packed. By nightfall, they had covered nearly 30 miles, putting significant distance between themselves and Abiquiu. We'll camp here, Victor said as they reached a small clearing near a stream. Get an early start tomorrow. He helped Sophia dismount, his hands gentle on her waist, mindful of her condition. How are you feeling? The ride wasn't too hard on you. I'm fine, Sophia assured him, touched by his concern. Tired, but fine. Victor nodded, setting about making camp with the efficiency of a man accustomed to life on the trail. He built a small fire, spread bedrolls on opposite sides of it, a gesture of respect for her reputation that made Sophia smile inwardly. Given the circumstances, and prepared a more substantial meal from his supplies. As they sat by the fire eating stew from tin plates, the reality of what they had done began to sink in for Sophia. She had left behind everything familiar, everyone who knew her, to start anew with this man she had known for less than half a year. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Having second thoughts, Victor asked quietly, observing her pensive expression. Sophia shook her head. No, just adjusting. It's strange to think that by now Harold has found my note. That people in town are probably already beginning to talk. Does that bother you? Not as much as I thought it would, Sophia admitted. I spent so long caring what others thought, trying to be the dutiful daughter, the proper wife. It's almost a relief to be free of those expectations. Victor smiled, the firelight dancing on his features. Freedom can be overwhelming at first, but you'll get used to it. Is that what you feel with me? Free? Sophia asked, curious about how he viewed their relationship. Victor considered the question seriously, as he did most things. Not exactly, he said finally. With you, I feel complete. Like I've found the missing part of myself I didn't even know was absent until you appeared. He looked slightly embarrassed at the admission. That probably sounds foolish. No, Sophia said, reaching across the space between them to take his hand. It sounds like exactly how I feel. They sat in companionable silence as the fire burned low, hands linked, each lost in their own thoughts but anchored by the other's presence. We should sleep, Victor said eventually. Tomorrow will be another long day. Sophia nodded, suddenly shy despite the intimacy they had already shared. Victor seemed to understand without words, helping her arrange her bedroll comfortably before retreating to his own on the far side of the fire. But as he turned to go, Sophia caught his hand. Stay, she said softly. Please, I don't want to be alone tonight. Victor hesitated, searching her face. Are you sure? We don't have to, I'm sure, Sophia interrupted. Whatever comes, whatever challenges we face, I want us to face them together. Starting now. With a nod, Victor moved his bedroll beside hers, creating a space just large enough for two. As they lay together under the vast New Mexico sky, his arm a comforting weight across her waist, his heartbeat strong and steady against her back. Sophia felt a sense of rightness, of belonging, that had eluded her in all the months of her marriage to Harold. "Victor," she whispered into the darkness. His voice was a rumble she could feel as well as hear. "I love you." His arm tightened around her and he pressed a kiss to her hair. "And I love you, Sophia, more than I have words to say." It was enough, more than enough. Whatever tomorrow brought, whatever hardships lay ahead, they would face them together, bound by a love freely given and freely accepted, not by the constraints of convenience or obligation. The journey to Colorado took nearly 2 weeks, a time of both physical challenge and emotional healing for Sophia. Each day put more distance between her and her old life. Each night brought her closer to Victor, deepening the connection between them. They traveled cautiously, avoiding main roads and larger settlements where news of a runaway wife might have spread, relying instead on Victor's knowledge of lesser-known trails and hunting cabins. By the time they crossed into Colorado territory, Sophia's condition was beginning to show, a slight rounding of her abdomen that could still be concealed under loose clothing but wouldn't remain hidden for much longer. They had discussed their story carefully. They would present themselves as husband and wife, recently arrived from New Mexico, expecting their first child. Victor had purchased simple gold bands in a small trading post along the way, and Sophia had tucked away Harold's ostentatious ring, wearing only her mother's slender band beneath Victor's. Their destination was a small but growing settlement near the foothills of the Rocky Mountains, where Victor had worked briefly during his Army days and still had connections. As they rode into town, Sophia felt a mixture of trepidation and hope. This place, with its single main street lined with wooden buildings, its surrounding pastures and distant mountains, would be her home now. These strangers would become her neighbors, perhaps her friends. And most importantly, it would be where her child would be born and raised, hopefully in a household filled with the love and warmth she had known in her own childhood. Victor led them directly to a modest boarding house at the edge of town, where a plump, cheerful widow named Mrs. Hollister welcomed them without excessive curiosity. "Mr. and Mrs. Hayes," she said, noting the names Victor gave her in a well-worn ledger. "Rooms at the top of the stairs, first on the right. Includes breakfast at 7 sharp and dinner at 6. Wash basins down the hall. Bathing day is Saturday. That'll be $2 a week in advance." Victor paid without hesitation, and Mrs. Hollister handed over a large iron key. "Hope you'll be comfortable. Town's growing fast, but we're friendly folk here." Their room was small but clean, with a double bed, a washstand, a small chest of drawers, and a window overlooking the main street. Sophia sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly overcome with exhaustion from the journey and the enormity of the changes in her life. Victor knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "Are you all right?" she nodded, offering him a tired smile. "Just overwhelmed. It's really happening, isn't it? We're really here, starting over." "We are," Victor confirmed, his expression serious. "And Sophia, I want you to know, if at any point you regret this decision, if you find that this life isn't what you hoped for, you only have to say the word. I would never hold you against your will, never expect you to stay out of obligation." Sophia squeezed his hands, touched by his continued concern for her happiness above his own. "I won't regret it," she assured him. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." The first few weeks in their new home were a time of adjustment and careful integration into the community. Victor found work almost immediately at a local ranch, his skills and experience making him a valuable addition to the operation. Sophia, with her education and refined manners, was invited to assist at the small schoolhouse 3 days a week, teaching the younger children while the regular schoolmistress focused on the older students. They were accepted without much question, a young couple starting out like so many others in the West. If anyone noticed that Sophia's pregnancy seemed rather advanced for newlyweds, they were too polite or too busy with their own affairs to mention it. The community welcomed them with the practical kindness typical of frontier settlements, invitations to Sunday socials, gifts of preserved foods and hand-me-down baby items, offers of help with finding more permanent housing before winter set in. It was at one such social, about a month after their arrival, that the possibility of a real home presented itself. They were chatting with an elderly couple, the Hendersons, who mentioned that their son had built a small cabin on their property before deciding to move on to Oregon instead. "Been sitting empty for near on 2 years now," Mr. Henderson said, his weathered face creased with concern as he looked at Sophia's growing belly. "It's nothing fancy, mind you, but it's solid. Got a good roof, tight walls, a proper stone chimney. Young couple like yourselves with a little one on the way, you need your own place." "That's very kind of you," Victor said, interest clear in his voice, "but I'm sure you'd want a fair price for it." Mrs. Henderson waved away the comment. "We don't need money, not at our age. What we need is good neighbors, someone to lend a hand when the work gets to be too much for my Robert's old bones." She glanced meaningfully at Victor's strong frame. "You help out when needed, keep an eye on us as we're not getting any younger, and we'll call it even." And so, with startling simplicity, Sophia and Victor became homeowners. The cabin was indeed small, just 2 rooms, a main living area with a stone fireplace and a smaller bedroom, but it was sturdily built on a pretty piece of land about a half-mile from the Henderson place. With help from neighbors and colleagues from the ranch, Victor added a lean-to kitchen at the back and began collecting lumber for a cradle and other furniture they would need. Sophia, despite her advancing pregnancy, threw herself into making the cabin a home. She sewed curtains from fabric purchased with her schoolhouse earnings, planted a small herb garden that would flourish in the spring, and arranged their few possessions with an artist's eye for beauty and function. Each evening, she and Victor would sit by the fire, sometimes talking late into the night, sometimes simply enjoying the companionable silence, both marveling at how quickly their new life had taken shape. News from Abiquiu reached them only once during those early months, in the form of a letter from Thomas that found its way to them through a cattle buyer who traveled between the territories. Harold, it seemed, had been furious at first, threatening to track Sophia down and bring her back by force. But faced with the scandal of a wife who had fled and the practical difficulties of a search, he had eventually accepted the situation, telling anyone who would listen that she had been unstable, unsuited to marriage, and that he was well rid of her. "Mother says to tell you he's already courting the banker's daughter from Santa Fe," Thomas wrote. "Barely waited a decent interval before moving on, so you needn't worry about him pursuing you." The letter went on to assure her that the family was managing well, that Margaret's health continued to improve, and that they all missed her but were happy knowing she was where she belonged. Sophia wept when she read it, a mixture of relief and homesickness washing over her. Victor had held her, understanding without words the complex emotions the letter had stirred. "We'll visit them someday," he promised. "When enough time has passed, when it's safe, your mother will know her grandchild." As winter settled over the mountains, turning the world white and hushed, Sophia's time drew near. The baby, active and strong, kicked and rolled beneath her heart, a constant reminder of the new life that would soon join them. Victor grew increasingly protective, insisting on handling the more strenuous household tasks, watching her with a mixture of awe and concern that never failed to touch her deeply. "I never thought I'd have this again," he confessed one night as they lay in bed, his hand resting on her rounded belly. "After Emily and the baby died, I closed that part of myself off, couldn't bear to hope for it again." Sophia covered his hand with her own. "I know. And I never thought I'd find this at all a man who sees me as a partner, not a possession. Someone who loves me for myself, not for what I can provide." "I do love you," Victor said, his voice rough with emotion. "More than I can say." "Show me," Sophia whispered, turning in his arms, seeking his lips with her own. Their lovemaking that night was gentle, mindful of her condition but no less passionate for it. Afterward, as Victor slept beside her, Sophia lay awake, filled with a contentment she had never imagined possible. Whatever challenges lay ahead, and she had no illusions that their life would be free of difficulties, they would face them together, bound by a love that had overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles to flourish. The baby came 2 weeks later, on a clear, cold January night in 1878. Victor rode through a moonlit landscape to fetch Mrs. Hollister, who served as the settlement's midwife in addition to running the boarding house. By the time they returned, Sophia was well into labor, her face pale but determined as she worked with the ancient rhythm of birth. "You're doing fine, Mrs. Hayes," Mrs. Hollister said, her capable hands checking the baby's position. "This little one's in a hurry to meet the world, I think." Victor hovered anxiously nearby, torn between wanting to comfort Sophia and fear of being in the way. When she cried out with a particularly strong contraction, he moved instinctively to her side, taking her hand, murmuring encouragement. "Maybe you should wait outside, Mr. Hayes," Mrs. Hollister suggested, but Sophia gripped Victor's hand tighter. "No," she said firmly, despite her pain. "I want him here. I need him here." And so Victor stayed, supporting Sophia through the long hours of labor, witnessing with awe and terror the power and vulnerability of the woman he loved as she brought new life into the world. When the baby finally emerged, red-faced and indignant at the abrupt change in circumstances, Mrs. Hollister placed the squalling infant on Sophia's chest. "You have a son," she announced, beaming with the satisfaction of a job well done. "A fine, healthy boy." Sophia gazed down at the tiny face, overwhelmed with a love so fierce it took her breath away. This was her child, hers, and in every way that truly mattered, Victor's. He might have been conceived in a loveless union, but he would be raised in love, surrounded by it, shaped by it. "Hello, little one," she whispered, touching a fingertip to his perfect cheek. "Welcome to our family." Victor leaned down, his face wet with unashamed tears, to study his son. "He's beautiful," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "Like his mother, as Mrs. Hollister bustled about, cleaning up and making Sophia comfortable. The new parents continued to marvel at their child, counting fingers and toes, commenting on the wisp of dark hair, the strong grip of tiny fingers around Victor's thumb. "What shall we call him?" Victor asked, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed, one arm around Sophia, the other hand gently cradling the baby's head. Sophia considered for a moment, then smiled. "Joseph, after my father, Joseph Victor Hayes." Victor's eyes widened at the inclusion of his own name. "Are you sure?" "Completely sure," Sophia confirmed. "You are his father in every way that matters. He should carry your name." Later, after Mrs. Hollister had departed with promises to return in the morning to check on mother and child, and little Joseph had nursed for the first time before falling into an exhausted sleep, Sophia and Victor lay together in their bed, the baby nestled securely between them. "I never imagined being this happy," Sophia confessed, her eyes heavy with the need for sleep but her heart too full to succumb just yet. "Nor I," Victor agreed, his hand covering hers where it rested on their son's swaddled form. "And it's just the beginning, Sophia." just the beginning of our story. As she drifted toward sleep, Sophia reflected on the journey that had brought her here from a marriage of convenience that had trapped her body and spirit to this life of freedom and love that had liberated both. She had lost much along the way: her home, her reputation, the easy relationship with her family, but had gained infinitely more. A partner who cherished her as an equal, a child to love and nurture, and the precious knowledge that true happiness came not from security or status, but from having the courage to follow one's heart, even when the path was uncertain and fraught with risk. In the years that followed, the Hayes family thrived in their Colorado home. Victor eventually saved enough to purchase a small ranch of their own, where they raised horses and a modest herd of cattle. Sophia continued to teach at the settlement school, her natural gift for education making her a beloved figure in the community. Joseph grew into a strong, thoughtful boy with his mother's amber eyes and his father's quiet determination. 2 more children joined the family: a daughter, Margaret Aliner, born in the spring of 1880, and another son, William Thomas, who arrived in the summer of 1883. Victor was present for each birth, just as devoted and awestruck as he had been with Joseph, treating all 3 children with the same unconditional love and patient guidance. News from Abiquiu came sporadically but consistently through letters from Thomas, who had indeed apprenticed with the blacksmith and now ran his own successful shop. William had completed his education in Santa Fe and become a teacher himself, inspired by his sister's example. And Margaret, defying everyone's expectations, had not only survived her illness but regained much of her former vigor, managing the Gardner ranch with Thomas's help and becoming something of a local legend for her resilience and sharp business sense. Harold Blackburn had remarried, as Thomas had predicted, to the banker's daughter from Santa Fe. They had no children, a fact that caused much speculation in the town, but was never mentioned directly to Harold's face. He remained prosperous, but according to Thomas's carefully worded reports, not particularly well liked or respected. In the spring of 1885, 8 years after their flight from Abiquiu, an opportunity arose for a reunion. Margaret, now 63 and determined to meet her grandchildren before she grew too frail to travel, wrote to suggest a meeting in Denver, neutral ground where the risk of encountering anyone from their past was minimal. The journey was long and somewhat arduous with 3 young children, but the joy of the reunion made every difficulty worthwhile. Margaret, her hair now completely silver but her eyes as bright as ever, wept openly as she embraced Sophia, then Victor, then each of her grandchildren in turn. "You were right to go," she said to Sophia when they had a moment alone together. "I see it in your face, in the way you and Victor look at each other. This is what love builds: a true partnership, a family bound by more than duty or convenience." Thomas and William had come as well, both grown men now, eager to know their sister again and to meet the niece and nephews they had heard about through letters. There were awkward moments at first, gaps of shared experience that couldn't be bridged, but by the end of their week together, the bonds of family had reasserted themselves, stronger perhaps for having been tested by separation. On their last evening together, as the children slept and the adults sat around the fire in their rented cottage, Thomas raised his glass in a toast. "To courage," he said, looking directly at Sophia, "and to love, which makes all things possible." "To love," echoed the others, glasses raised in the firelight. Later, as Sophia and Victor prepared for bed, she found herself reflecting on the strange, winding path that had led her to this moment, how a decision made from desperation had ultimately opened the door to a happiness she couldn't have imagined in those dark days after her father's death. "What are you thinking about?" Victor asked, coming to stand behind her, his arms circling her waist as they had countless times over the years. "About how sometimes the worst circumstances can lead to the best outcomes," Sophia replied, leaning back against him. "If my father hadn't died, if the ranch hadn't failed, if I hadn't married Harold, I might never have found you." Victor pressed a kiss to her temple. "I'd like to think we would have found each other anyway," he said. "That some things are meant to be, regardless of the path." Sophia turned in his arms, studying the face she had loved for nearly a decade, now older, with more lines at the corners of his eyes and strands of gray at his temples, but still as dear to her as it had been that day beneath the cottonwood when they first acknowledged their feelings. "Perhaps you're right," she said, rising on tiptoe to kiss him softly. "Perhaps some loves are simply written in the stars, waiting for us to be brave enough to claim them." As they settled into bed, Victor's arm around her as naturally as breathing, Sophia sent up a silent prayer of gratitude for the journey that had brought her here from a trapped bride in a marriage of convenience to a woman fully alive, fully loved, and fully free.